Okay, let's dive in. Picture this. You're following a really tense situation unfolding, right? You've got protests, federal agents deployed, a lot of people feeling very vulnerable.
Yeah, a real pressure cooker situation.
Exactly. And then suddenly the language just escalates. You get a state governor basically staring down a federal official and dropping this line. It almost sounds like it's from a movie script.
Ugh.
Arrest me. Let's just get it over with, tough guy.
Well, yeah, that definitely cuts through the usual political noise.
Right. And that moment, that flashpoint of defiance, maybe even a bit of, I don't know, political theater. That's what we're digging into today.
Okay.
You've given us the source materials, primarily a transcript from MSNBC covering this whole thing. ICE raids in L.A., the community reaction, protests, and this federal deployment that the state leadership was really pushing back against.
Got it. So we're looking at how that transcript reported on the clash.
Yeah, our mission here is to unpack that transcript, pull out the key details, understand the perspectives it presents, and really zoom in on what made this specific confrontation between California Governor Gavin Newsom and the Trump administration's Border Czar, Tom Homan, so remarkable.
And kind of unusually performative, maybe, given the context.
Exactly. We're stepping into that moment in Southern California, high vulnerability, rising tensions, and the governor decides to meet what he saw as federal overreach with this incredibly public, very personal dare.
Okay, so where do we start? The situation itself.
Let's do that. What does the source material tell us about the scene on the ground? What was actually happening in Los Angeles that day?
Well, the source really sets the stage.
Mhm.
It talks about protests kicking off across LA starting on a Friday, and it makes clear these weren't just general unhappiness. They were a direct response to ICE raids happening.
So targeted enforcement action sparked this.
Right. And the scale wasn't small, according to the source. ICE apparently reported arresting 118 people connected to search warrants overall. But 44 of those arrests happened during that specific Friday operation that really seemed to ignite the major protests.
And what about the protests themselves? Any numbers on that?
Yeah, the source mentions authorities reporting at least 56 protesters arrested amidst all the demonstrations. So significant numbers on both sides of the interaction there.
The source also gives some pretty vivid details, doesn't it, about how it looked?
It does. It mentions aerial footage, seeing tactical vehicles, specifically calls out Bearcats, those armored personnel carriers.
Which you don't usually associate with standard immigration enforcement, right?
Not typically, no. That's more high-risk SWAT team kind of equipment. The source also mentions reports of clashes happening, and at one point, things spilled onto the freeway. Protesters briefly shut down part of the 101.
And the source highlighted something about the style of these IC operations, too, didn't it, compared to the past?
Yes, that's a key point the reporter makes. They describe this level of tactical visibility, the Bearcats and so on, as unusual compared to historical ICE operations.
And the targets.
And the targeting, yeah. Specifically mentioning raids at places like Home Depots, the reporter notes these are known spots where day laborers gather, and raiding those specific locations wasn't really typical under previous administrations. It suggests maybe a shift towards more visible, perhaps more confrontational tactics.
And all this is happening where the source emphasizes the location, too.
Absolutely. It highlights Los Angeles as a majority-minority city, and it stresses the sheer scale of the estimated undocumented population. The reporter throws out a number, potentially up to 1 million people just in the LA area.
Which means countless mixed-status families.
Exactly. Parents may be undocumented, kids born here as citizens. It's deeply woven into the fabric of the city, so when you roll out tactical vehicles, conduct large-scale arrests, target community gatherings, spots, that sense of fear, that vulnerability, it's not just a few people feeling it. It affects a huge number of residents.
It creates this backdrop of widespread anxiety.
Definitely. And it's against that backdrop, that very real tension, that the whole political drama layer gets added.
Right, because then comes the federal response. And according to the source, it immediately clashed with where the state stood. President Trump ordered National Guard troops deployed.
That's what the source reports. 2,000 National Guard members sent to LA. And apparently, an extra 500 Marines were on standby as well.
Wow. And the key point of contention here, as the source lays it out, is how they were deployed, right?
Exactly. The deployment happened without California's governor asking for them, without Governor Newsom requesting that help.
Which is unusual.
Highly unusual, according to the reporter and the source. They explicitly state it's the first time in decades federal troops were sent into a state like that without the governor's request or agreement.
And the stated reason from the federal side?
Was apparently to protect federal property and federal agents on the ground. That was the official justification cited in the source.
But state and local leaders weren't buying it.
Not at all. The source says Governor Newsom and LA Mayor Karen Bass immediately pushed back. They stated flat out the National Guard wasn't needed. More than that, they argued its presence was actually inflammatory.
Making things worse, not better.
That was their argument, yeah. And interestingly, the reporter on the ground in the source transcript seemed to offer some support for that view. They observed that the really significant skirmishes, the heightened clashes, weren't really happening on that scale before the Guard arrived.
So the timing seemed to correlate with an increase in tension from that perspective.
That's what the reporting suggests. And then things got even more heated.
Because Tom Homan stepped in, the administration's Border Czar.
Right. And the source details this specific, pretty high-profile statement he made. He was quoted saying he wasn't ruling out arresting Governor Newsom or Mayor Trump.
For what?
If he believed they were interfering with federal ICE enforcement operations, that was the threat, as reported.
Okay. So that really sets the stage for the big confrontation, the one that kind of defines this source material.
Absolutely, because you have a federal official making what sounds very much like a direct threat against the state's top elected officials right in the middle of this powder keg situation.
Right.
And then you get Governor Newsom's response.
Which the source really spotlights.
Yeah.
And it wasn't exactly a carefully worded press release, was it?
Not even close. It was more like a direct, almost personal challenge. The source quotes him reacting specifically to Homan's threat, and the language is just incredibly blunt, almost theatrical.
Give us the quote, the main one.
He says, and this is directly from the source transcript, "Arrest me. Let's just get it over with, tough guy."
Tough guy.
Yeah.
Wow. That phrase alone just lands differently, doesn't it?
It really does. It frames the whole thing. It's not just disagreeing. It's like taunting almost, daring him.
And he didn't stop there, according to the source.
No, he doubled down. The source quotes him saying things like, "He knows where to find me," and maybe revealing his mindset, "You know I don't give a damn."
He sounds completely dismissive of the threat.
And almost exasperated. The source includes him saying things like, "The hell is this guy?" and referring to Homan's stance as, "That kind of bloviating is exhausting."
Bloviating. Okay, so it highlights this really dramatic public exchange. It takes this incredibly serious situation, people being arrested, troops on the streets, and injects this element of, like, personal political performance art.
Yeah, the source definitely flags this specific back and forth, recognizing how unusual, how attention-grabbing that level of direct, almost mocking challenge is between high-level officials in public.
It certainly cuts through the usual political jargon. That tough guy line really frames the whole interaction in a very specific, almost playground challenge kind of way, despite the high stakes.
It does. It's memorable, that's for sure.
Okay, so he throws down this incredibly blunt dare. But the source material also digs into why Newsom took such a forceful stance. What reasons did he give?
The source explains he really framed his opposition around protecting people, particularly vulnerable people caught in the middle. He's quoted appealing directly, saying things like, "Lay your hands off 4-year-old girls that are trying to get educated."
Trying to humanize the issue.
Exactly. And he continues, "Lay your hands off. These poor people are just trying to live their lives, man, trying to live their lives, paying their taxes, been here 10 years.
So focusing on people integrated into the community. Kids, taxpayers, long-term residents.
Yeah.
Not abstract policy points.
Right. His frustration, as this course presents it, really seems to stem from this feeling that the federal actions, the raids, the Guard deployment were, in his words, putting real people's lives at risk.
So his rationale is grounded in that perceived human cost.
That's how he framed it, according to the source.
Now, the source also brings President Trump into the picture more directly, right? There's this account of a phone call Newsom had with him.
Yes, and this part adds another layer of, well, disagreement, let's say. According to the source, Newsom describes getting a call from President Trump late that Friday night, like 1:30 a.m. California time.
A late call. How did Newsom describe it?
He actually characterized the call itself as very decent and relatively cordial, that it lasted nearly 20 minutes.
Okay. So what was the issue then?
The issue, from Newsom's perspective, as reported in the source, was what wasn't discussed. Newsom claimed that during that entire almost 20-minute conversation, the president never mentioned the National Guard deployment.
Even though they were being sent to a state.
Right. And Newsom pointed out, according to the source, that the Department of Defense's own order for such deployments apparently requires coordination with the governor, which he says didn't happen on that call.
Okay, so Newsom says it never came up. What did Trump say?
Well, this leads to Newsom's really strong reaction, again, captured vividly in the source. He reacted to President Trump's alleged counterclaim that the deployment had been discussed.
And his reaction was?
He's quoted directly in the source, calling President Trump a stone-cold liar on that specific point.
Stone-cold liar. Wow. Again, just incredibly direct language.
Absolutely. And the source notes Newsom didn't stop there. He apparently made a broader statement about the relationship, saying something like, "There's no working with the president, there's only working for him, and I will never work for Donald Trump."
That really underscores the breakdown in relations, doesn't it?
Completely.
Yeah.
He framed it as collaboration being impossible. And the source adds that he publicly called on President Trump to rescind this order, calling the deployment itself illegal and unconstitutional, and also immoral.
So challenging its legality and its purpose.
Yes, arguing they were, quote, creating the conditions that you claim you're solving. Basically saying the feds were making things worse.
So the source paints this picture of conflict on multiple levels. You've got the ICE actions, the community protests, the state versus federal clash over the Guard, this war of words with personal challenges flying back and forth.
And even a dispute about what was said in a private phone call with the president. It's quite a tangled situation.
Bringing it back to the ground, though.
Yeah.
Did Newsom take any concrete action beyond the verbal challenges?
Well, he maintained his position, as reported in the source, that the federal actions and the Guard were inflammatory and just fueling the unrest.
And legally.
According to the source, he stated his intention to file a lawsuit, specifically to try and get authority back from the president regarding the National Guard and get those troops removed from L.A. So, backing up the words with a legal threat.
And what about the overall situation in L.A. at that point? Did the source give a sense of whether things were completely out of control?
The reporter's assessment, captured in the source, tried to provide some context. They acknowledged there was civil unrest, there were some reports of looting in specific areas, but crucially, they noted that widespread citywide riots weren't happening on a massive scale across LA.
So, localized incidents, but not the whole city burning.
That seems to be the picture painted. And significantly, the reporter reiterated that observation we mentioned earlier, that the most visible skirmishes, the real flashpoints of tension, seem directly linked to the presence of the National Guard forces.
Which supports Newsom's argument that the deployment was counterproductive.
It lends weight to that perspective, yes, that the federal presence was maybe provoking conflict rather than calming it down.
It's fascinating how the source captures that collision, isn't it? Between the really strong, almost over-the-top political language and the more nuanced, maybe even contradictory reality playing out on the streets.
Absolutely. The state says federal action inflamed things. The feds say they were necessary to protect property and agents. And caught in the middle is this public drama with incredibly blunt language.
Which brings us back really to that headline moment. What this deep dive into the source material really throws into sharp relief is that specific instance where a high-stakes political fight just broke out of the usual channels.
Yeah, it wasn't just policy points or formal statements anymore. It spilled over into this direct, personal challenge delivered with remarkable bluntness and maybe a bit of political showmanship, too.
The source really captures that rare kind of verbal sparring, doesn't it? A governor daring a federal official, "Arrest me," using language like "cuff guy," that's designed purely to provoke and grab headlines.
It definitely adds this unforgettable layer of personal, almost performative conflict onto an already incredibly tense situation.
So as we wrap up this look at the source material, it leaves you with a pretty interesting thought, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What does it actually tell us when political language gets this bold, this challenging, arrest me, tough guy, stone cold liar?
Right. What does that kind of rhetoric, almost absurdly direct, reveal about just how intense the underlying disagreements are?
And maybe what does it say about the communication strategies leaders sometimes reach for in these moments of crisis, when authority itself is being contested so publicly? How does political talk shift when it goes from debate straight into a public dare? Something to think about.